I remember one poignant night when I was a hospital chaplain. A boy had been brought in after he was hit by a car when he ran across the street in front of the beach house that his parents were renting. Unfortunately, he could not be saved from his massive injuries. By the time the family and friends arrived at the hospital where he had been brought by ambulance, he had been declared dead. I was part of the hospital staff who had to deliver this sad news to the group assembled in a small room in the emergency department. As you can imagine, there were many tears and exclamations of grief. The father crumpled to the floor, screaming, "I should have protected him. That is what fathers do. How could I have let this happen?" Other people began filling the room. Grandparents rushing to the hospital hoping for good news. Friends who thought they would be joining for a week of fun at the beach. Eventually, someone in the group identified himself as a preacher and said it was time to pray. I thought so too. He started by asking for God to help this family at this terrible time. And then he began to say that it was time to praise God that this boy had been delivered from an evil world and had gone to a better place. I resisted the impulse to throw him out of the room. When he paused for a breath, I broke in with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Others joined in for some of the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm. By the time we were finished, everyone was a little bit calmer. Gradually, I began to answer some questions about what they should do next, and eventually we walked out together to the parking lot. That was almost the hardest part, because the tendency is to refuse to move, as though the terrible news could be contained by staying in place. We see that tendency in today's gospel. As we saw last week in John's account, in this reading from Luke, the disciples are huddled together in a room. There have been some stories of an empty tomb and Jesus' appearances, but mostly there's grief, confusion, and fear. Jesus' friends are clinging to each other as they try to make sense of what has happened and judge for themselves what to believe. Jesus appears to them, and his first words are, "Peace be with you," the words they most need to hear. They're afraid he's a ghost, but he assures them he's real. And he goes on to commission them, to equip them to begin to spread a message. This is the heart of the gospel that Jesus has embodied. Not so much a miracle story as a story of enduring love and care on the move, set loose in the world. We're not so different from those early disciples. Our world is constantly rocked by stories of loss and death, young people senselessly shot, ethnic and religious wars of great cruelty, the ravages of cancer and infections, a young boy running to join his friends at the beach or in a daycare center in Oklahoma City, or watching the marathon runners suddenly cut down and killed. It's too much to take in. Of course, we react with fear and confusion and grief. And into this picture comes Jesus saying, "Peace be with you." Through the Gospels, we have a swirl of images of post-Easter appearances, a picture that we put together and begin to call resurrection, a sign that God, through Christ, has overcome death, a promise of new life through God's beloved Son. It's a precious picture. It is good news. But it is not a silver bullet. It is not a magic pill that we are offered. I reacted so strongly to that preacher in the hospital room because it felt like he was trying to offer the family a quick fix to the terrible situation they found themselves in. I am sure he was trying to offer comfort. But I remember when people said the same thing, those same words, at my husband's death, and it was not helpful. Not in the midst of the terrible realization that someone you love so deeply is gone. I wanted to scream, "No, he's not in a better place. This is the place where he should be. This is the place where we love him. This is the place he wanted to be." Now, before you start worrying about heresy in the pulpit, let me say, I trust the resurrection with all my heart. And all these years later, I can say that in some ways, Thad is in a better place. But I think the process of getting to that affirmation is slow and difficult and not in a straight line. For the church to offer up resurrection as the concept that suddenly makes everything okay is not good news. It's a travesty. New life is God's gift, but it is hard-won, both by Jesus' suffering and our own. Our culture encourages us to find quick fixes. And if there isn't one, somebody should invent it. It's a form of denial. We can't deal with the harsh realities around us. We want to pretend that we will always be young and beautiful and smart and lovable. And if something disrupts that picture, we expect a cure or a solution, or at least someone we can sue. The picture of Jesus with his disciples, both before and after his death, shows us that new life is not like that. It's more difficult, and yet more precious and more lasting. The good news of Jesus is that God's love never deserts us, and that this love can so permeate our lives that we can find comfort in our sorrows and losses and power for continuing to walk into the light of that love. In the words we heard today from the first letter of John, "Beloved, we are God's children now. What we will be has not yet been revealed." What we will be has not yet been revealed. We are beloved of God, God's children by adoption, chosen to receive divine love at the core of our lives, and called into transformation, into God's gift of new life. I remember the first piano lesson I had as a child of about 6. The teacher showed me a few notes on the keyboard, starting from middle C. Then she showed me how those notes were represented in the printed musical notation. I was supposed to practice playing, I think it was 3 notes, at home, and then come back in a few days for my next 15-minute lesson. But when I got home and sat down at my own piano, I couldn't make sense of what I was to do. It seemed baffling. I distinctly remember thinking, I will never be able to do this. I should just give up now. I'm not a very patient person. Anything worth doing takes practice and making mistakes and trying again and not being discouraged. Some of you here today, we've just seen you, are going to run the marathon tomorrow. But you weren't suddenly, one day, able to do this. You've been working for a very long time, beginning with shorter runs and practicing and learning how to pace yourself and when to go all out. You know how to warm up and cool down and take care of your body. You know how to find fresh wind when the finish line is so far beyond your sight. There's been a lot of talk lately about resiliency. And I worry a bit about that concept. Maybe I'm too literal-minded. But I think resiliency means bouncing back to an original shape after you've been deformed, as though nothing had happened. I don't think that's helpful when thinking about sorrow and loss. Praising someone who can act as though nothing has happened, who's moved on, is either denial or bad advice. We don't get over grief and loss. We are changed by it. When Jesus appears to his disciples, the wounds are there, but they're no longer signs of death. By God's grace, our sorrows transform us and bring us closer to God's heart. It's mysterious and beautiful and trustworthy. What we will be has not yet been revealed. So here's the paradox of the Easter message. It's about both promise, a trustworthy promise, and hope. God has done for us what we cannot do for ourselves. God has submitted to death-dealing powers and has come to us on the other side of that death to remain the reliable source of life and love. That is the promise. And here is the hope, that through Christ's life and love, we are empowered to become disciples, to become students of resurrection, to embrace the discipline and companionship of entering into that new life as individuals and in relationship with others who share this journey. It is not magic, but it is life-changing. Jesus comes alongside us as our running companion. We learn how to make the efforts. Our own legs are running, our own hearts are beating, our own lungs are expanding. But the air around us, the light shining in our eyes, and the spirit of beauty that draws us ever onward, all these come to us from the risen one. Jesuit philosopher and natural scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote a wonderful poem that says, in part, "Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We're impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. Yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that may take a very long time." The poem continues, "And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Do not try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace, and circumstances acting on your goodwill will make you tomorrow. Only God can say what this new spirit gradually forming in you will be." My friends, Easter invites us into a relationship with the power that creates and loves us, a love that death cannot overcome. We see glimpses of this love. We celebrate it, we share it, and we live into it. It's sometimes slow and torturous work, but it is work filled with hope and the promise of new life today and in all the days to come.